Welcome. We're just going to give it a moment to let people in from the waiting room. And as you come in, feel free to find the chat feature and let us know where you're zooming in from and what affiliation or organization you're with. We'd love to see where everyone's coming from. Just giving it a beat, allowing people to come in from the waiting room. We'd love to see where you're coming from. So if you want to use the chat to let us know. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And Scott, just keep an eye on the waiting room for us and let people in as they come. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Erica Wilhite. I'm the Arts Learning and Communities Director here at the Oklahoma Arts Council, as well as the ADA Coordinator. And so that we can be accessible for folks who are blind or have low vision, throughout the session, we will self-describe our appearance as we introduce ourselves. So I'll start. I am a white middle-aged woman with red wavy chin-length bob. I'm wearing kind of cat-eye glasses, and I have a black top with a floral pattern button up to the collar. Also for captioning, if you need some captioning at the bottom of the screen, you can see that option. You can select that for closed captioning. And also this webinar is being recorded. So in about a week, I will be emailing everyone that is registered a link to this YouTube, a copy of the meeting, as well as any resources that we share throughout the session. Feel free to participate with your cameras off or on. And you can use the chat feature to drop in any questions you have for the presenters as they come up. If we don't get to the question in the moment, there will be a section or the end of our session where we will have plenty of time to get to those questions. So we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a wonderfully diverse geographic representation today in today's session. So the Oklahoma Arts Council, this is a part of our Accessibility in the Arts webinar series. It's our agency's mission to lead and cultivate and amplify the transformative power of the arts for all Oklahomans and their communities. So it's our goal with this webinar series to support you all in your endeavor to expand access to your programs to people with disabilities, for people with disabilities. Today, we're joined by Beth Bienview and Catherine Hayward from the ADA, as well as Portia Nelson and Nicole Agoyes with Open Door Arts, who are going to discuss the issues of navigating ADA compliance and accessibility with self-assessment tools. I'm just going to hand it over now to Beth Bienview and Catherine Hayward, who will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I wanted to thank you and all of your colleagues at the Oklahoma Arts Council for your support for this work. You've been doing some great virtual trainings throughout the year, and we're happy to participate and help you out with those. And yeah, so I think you're setting a great model for other state arts agencies. And so today, as she said, we're going to be talking about self-evaluation. And so Catherine and I will go over the requirements for recipients of our funds. And that includes those who receive funds from us through the Oklahoma Arts Council or your state or local arts councils, because the requirements apply to any of our funds that trickle down. So I will go ahead and get started and share my screen. And always takes a second to do that. All right. So, just to describe myself or continue to introduce myself, I am the accessibility director at the National Endowment for the Arts. I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and bangs. I'm wearing a black and white print top with a black background with the NEA logo in the corner. And the thing that you need to know about that is it has our website, which is arts.gov, which is the best URL in all of government, I think. That's my opinion. Any .gov with an arts before it is good with me. The National Endowment for the Arts is a federal agency that funds the arts across the country. And our office, the Office of Accessibility, we provide resources and technical assistance to the field. It's to help make the arts accessible for people living with disabilities, veterans, older adults, and those living in institutional settings. And we provide technical assistance and training to our applicants, grantees, artists with disabilities. We work with our staff to make sure that they understand the requirements for grantees, and also with the state arts agencies and the 6 regional arts organizations. So we do a lot throughout the year, and we're always happy to talk with folks in the field. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who will introduce herself and talk a little bit about disabilities. I'm going to take it back so you don't read too far in advance.
Thank you, Beth. This is Catherine. I am Catherine Hayward, the Accessibility Specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts, working with Beth in our Office of Accessibility. I am a white woman with long brown frizzy hair that I have tied back in a ponytail. I have a very small nose stud, and I'm wearing a multicolor, what I was told is zebra stripes. Quite exotic, I know. And I also have the black NEA background with our name and logo in the corner. And now I get to talk a little bit just to kind of set the framework and what we're talking about when we're talking about accessibility for people with disabilities. There are multiple models of ways of thinking and frameworks for thinking about disability, but the two kind of major ones are the medical and social model. So the medical model is one that has been in use for a very long time, and it really roots the problem of disability in the individual. And so it is the individual with the disability that has to adapt and has to be fixed. And that's in quotes. But the social model and other models that are a bit newer, although the social model has been around for quite a while, really talk about how it's the world and it's the environments that we encounter that create the barriers. And that once the barriers are addressed, disability is no longer the problem, and an individual can thrive in an accessible world. So it's not that a person is hard of hearing or deaf, but it is because sign language interpretation or captioning is not being offered. That's the reason a person can't participate, in this instance, in an arts activity. Next slide, please. There are also a breadth of disabilities and, lots of different ways to think about them. And because I think for many of us, our initial reaction is to think of a wheelchair user or a person with a mobility disability. And probably some of that comes from the fact that that's the universal symbol for accessibility. But I do want you to think about all of the different ways that people may be experiencing the world. So to also keep in mind sensory perception disabilities that include vision and hearing disabilities, as well as other sensory perceptions around noise and light, other things like that. Emotional or psychiatric disabilities or mental health conditions, and there's a lot of different ways about talking about that. Also important to keep in mind non-visible or non-apparent disabilities, which is the majority of disabilities. And this can include people that have chronic health conditions that may not outwardly appear to have any difficulties, but do have to think about their disability and the environment when choosing whether to attend or participate in an event. There's also neurodiversity, which also includes cognitive and intellectual disabilities, but just represents the different ways that people perceive and interact with their environments. And of course, physical and mobility disabilities.
Okay. I believe I'm going to talk
Yeah,
a little.
now I'm going to switch it back over to Beth to get a little bit more in the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I'll be talking about the laws and requirements, but we wanted to provide this foundation of thinking about disability, because especially the medical and social models, because um, once you address the barriers, disability is no longer a problem, a quote problem. So that's why it's important to assess your work, your physical environment, and your programs to make sure that you are that you are not the problem, and that people can thrive in your environment and in your programs. So one of the things that we emphasize is that it is the law. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was passed in 1973, this was the first major law that really affected organizations across the country. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs conducted by federal agencies, such as what we do, and those receiving our funding, such as our grantees, the state arts agencies, etc. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, and that was passed after another decade or so of activism to cover everyone else that besides those receiving federal funds. So it prohibits discrimination and it ensures equal opportunity for people with disabilities. And the two titles that are relevant to this conversation are Title II, which is state and local government services. So that's the work of the Oklahoma Arts Council and local arts agencies. And then Title III is places of public accommodation and services. So that includes commercial facilities. It includes museums, performing arts centers, theaters, etc. So pretty much most arts organizations. And this means that all organizations are legally required to provide reasonable and necessary accommodations for staff, that's both paid and unpaid, and visitors with disabilities. And under both of these laws, organizations receiving NEA funds through their state and local arts agencies must also comply with the requirements. I think I pass it back to Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. This is Catherine again. And I just want to underscore that when we're talking about people with disabilities, we're talking about, not just the audiences, but also artists you may be working with, speakers you may be working with for a particular program, your staff, volunteers, and interns. So really think beyond just audiences as well. So if you are getting a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and as Beth said at the beginning, that can also include funding or support that you're getting from your state arts agency if they're using NEA funds. So the three sort of major areas, and Beth and I do longer presentations that get into this in detail, but the three things to really think about are that you need to have an accessibility coordinator, you need to complete a Section 504 self-assessment, and you need to provide access accommodations for events and activities. And you need to do you are required to provide a request, but we also encourage best practices that include access throughout as much as possible. And I'm going to talk about, Beth and I are going to talk about each of those aspects briefly. So to just give you an idea also of, some of the common issues that come up for us, we have an accessibility questionnaire when an offer is made where you need to look at physical and program accessibility. And we're really looking for how, which is why it's bolded. How is the site physically accessible? And you cannot assume, and we cannot assume, that because it's a new building or because it's in a public building, that it is accessible. And we sometimes get answers that are, we are ADA compliant. And that requires further conversation because how do I know that? I need more specifics and I need to understand the how. Similarly, how are the activities accessible? So that goes into really issues of effective communication. So a couple of examples like the accessibility of materials, whether they're print or online. How is auditory and visual information conveyed for people? So designating an accessibility coordinator. This does not have to be a full-time position. The accessibility coordinator serves as a point of contact for questions around accessibility and for arranging accommodations. And it's a requirement under Section 504 for those receiving federal funding, and again, certain state arts agency funding, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, so the state arts agencies. And sometimes it's called a 504 coordinator or an ADA coordinator. We call it an accessibility coordinator just to kind of catch all of the different ways someone may be serving in that role. And we recommend that you list your accessibility coordinator either as part of a staff directory, if this is, especially if you're a state arts agency, and all promotional materials. So having a line about who to request an accommodation from. And we recommend both an email and telephone number so that people that communicate in different ways can request their accommodation or ask questions.
Okay. I think
Yeah. Back to
I'll
you for a
pick it
couple
up.
more.
Yeah, so the Section 504 self-evaluation, all grantees of ours, including sub-grantees receiving funds through a state or local arts agency, must complete a 504 self-evaluation, such as our Section 504 self-evaluation workbook. That is available on our website, and we'll make the link available to you. But it does not have to be that self-evaluation workbook. There are others out there, and you'll hear about one today. But we do have that one available. It is in need of an update, and we'll be working on that over the next period. So, but the workbook must be the completed workbook must be kept on file and reviewed or updated every 3 years. So, if you receive multiple sequential grants from us, you will need to update that every 3 years. Otherwise, we recommend that you review it every time you get a grant from us, if it's not every year, one after the other. You do not need to submit it to the NEA, but you must provide it to the NEA or the public if requested. Not having a 504 self-assessment on file is a common finding in our audits. Organizations are audited on a random basis. And so you must be sure to be able to provide that. State arts agencies have their own means of assessing your compliance. It might be through one of these workbooks. So I recommend that if you have a grant from the Oklahoma Arts Council or other, to look at the guidelines and the terms and conditions. And are we back to Catherine? Sorry, I have my list of who's saying what, but I don't have the numbers on the slides.
Sure, I can do it and round it out a little bit. So the Section 504 self-assessment, the purpose of that is a compliance, but also a planning tool. And it's meant to help you, arts organizations, and whoever else is here, evaluate the current state of accessibility and to really get you thinking at these deeper levels of what's in place, as well as to identify short and long-term goals to improve accessibility. So as we've mentioned, we do have a workbook, but it doesn't have to be ours. So it can be a similar assessment tool. But what I would recommend is at least taking a look at ours to understand the major areas and questions that are being asked. And some of those areas are around employment practices and policies. So like your internal policies and procedures around providing accommodations as well as accessibility of the facilities that you use. And also looking at program accessibility with an emphasis on effective communication, and being able to be sure that not only that you're conveying information in a way that is accessible to people, but that you have mechanisms in place to also receive communication. And again, thinking about the fact that there could be artists that you're working with, or staff, or volunteers, or individuals at partner agencies, that you want to make sure that you're being as accessible as possible and being able to work with them. And then Beth, maybe I'll let you finish off
Sure.
and share some of the resources.
Sure. We'll put these links in the chat, but I just wanted to let you know that we do have other resources, some from our accessibility webpage. The second bullet is that accessibility questionnaire that all grantees must complete and submit to us. It's on our Manage Your Award page. We have an FAQ on civil rights for applicants and grantees. There's a link for our self-evaluation workbook. We have a brief accessibility checklist, which is about 20 questions that if you just want to do a basic assessment before you dive more deeply into one of these the larger tools. We want to recommend the ADA National Network. It's a network of 10 regional ADA centers that are incredibly helpful. You can call them and email them, and they have webinars, so I encourage you to check that out. And then you can also go to the ADA's the 2010 design standards for physical access. So we will put all of those in the chat, and yeah, then we'll turn it back over to Erica and our other colleagues.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm just going to hand it over now to our team at Open Door Arts.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicola Goy, so I'm going to introduce myself in a moment, and I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, there it goes. All right, can everybody see the screen? Erica, would you? Okay, great, awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be with you all today. We're really grateful to Erica and to the Oklahoma Arts Council for the opportunity to be here with you and share some information about our Arts and Culture Accessibility Self-Assessment, which is a project of Open Door Arts. We're going to introduce ourselves in a minute and tell you more about the organization and about ourselves, myself and Portia. We're going to be using a slideshow today. On the image on this slide, you will see the logo of the Arts and Culture Accessibility Self-Assessment, and also some black and white images from different cultural organizations, and also the website of the self-assessment, which is www.artsaccessresources.org. And Portia's going to throw that link in the chat as well. All right, so by way of introduction, we'll start by telling you a little bit about Open Door Arts in case we are new to you. We are an organization based in Massachusetts. We're an arts and culture organization that is very uniquely working at the intersection of disability, arts, and education. And our mission is to promote access, representation, and participation of people with disabilities in our arts and cultural community. We've been around for about 44 years now. And on this slide, there is an image of our logo at the bottom. So a little bit about us, those of us who are on the call here, who are representing a bigger team. Again, there's myself and Portia here today, but there are a lot of advisors, consultants, access experts, and partners that have made this tool possible. So we're representing them today. I also want to give a special shout out to Hannah Goodwin, who some of you might know, who was a cultural access specialist with Open Door Arts during this process, and who made enormous contributions to the tool. So big shout out to Hannah. So by way of introduction, I'm Nicola Goyes. I use she, her pronouns. I am a light-skinned Latina woman with brown hair, with shoulder-length brown hair. And in the image on this slide, there is a black and white image of me posing in front of a woven art piece. My background is as a musician, an educator, disability advocate, and I'm the managing director at Open Door Arts, and I've worked at Open Door Arts for the past 20 years, really centering this work to help make the arts and culture field more accessible through our education, gallery, and cultural access programs. And so I'll pass it to Portia to introduce herself.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, I'm Portia Brown. I use the she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Operations at Open Door Arts. The slide features a round black and white photo of me. I'm a white woman with long blonde hair, and in the photograph, I'm standing in front of a woven piece of artwork at one of our local art museums. I'm a certified ADA coordinator, former special education teacher and instructional coach. And before joining Open Door Arts about 7 years ago now, I was overseeing the community and accessibility programs at Boston Ballet.
Great. And as I was saying earlier, Portia and I are just representing a much larger team of brilliant, wonderful human beings who came together to help inform the tool from the very beginning. There's a collage of black and white photos of most of those individuals, 12 of them here. And again, they contributed to this project from the very beginning, bringing both professional experience in the field in arts and culture with disability, and also their lived experience with disability. So we're enormously grateful for all of their contributions throughout the process. I'm going to pass it back to Portia.
Thanks. So before we kind of show you and tell you all about this new self-assessment tool that we created, we did want to just take a few moments to kind of explain the why behind this. It's really been a 2-year process that was founded in a lot of research, a lot of our own experience, and really an intention to, create something for ourselves and for our colleagues and for this field that could really be beneficial. And so we wanted to just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about that so you can kind of understand kind of the impetus and, vision behind this tool. So as Nicole mentioned, we are an over 40-year-old organization. One of the primary things we did and have done as an organization is support arts and culture organizations to be more accessible to people with disabilities, both patrons and employees. And so to do that, we really were working kind of a one-to-one consulting capacity with lots of different types of arts and culture organizations. And, we kept finding that regardless of what organization we were working with, if they were large, if they were small, if they were a botanical garden or, an independent theater, there were a lot of the same needs. There were a lot of the same questions. There were a lot of the same misunderstandings. And so we really wanted to kind of test out, is this anecdotal experience that we're having reflective of something bigger? And so between 2022 and 2024, we conducted a lot of research in the state of Massachusetts. I'm going to drop a link for your reference into the chat. And we have the findings of these reports. It's called Towards a Culture of Access, Parts 1 and 2. And these were really to evaluate and assess the state of arts and culture in our state, both from the perspectives of organizations, arts and culture organizations, and that you can find in part 1, as well as individuals with disabilities and caretakers of individuals with disabilities. And those findings are shown in part 2. So it was really interesting to kind of match up and compare our own experience with these broader findings. And we found some really interesting things that led to us, feeling this very strong need to move ahead and create this tool for the field. So first, we found that organizations vary greatly in how they were assessing, understanding, and actualizing their own accessibility. And unfortunately, this variability was leading directly to fatigue, distrust, and harm for people with disabilities. So in Towards a Culture of Access Part 2, we found that only 6% of people with disabilities said that it was easy for them to request accessible services and have their access needs met at arts and culture organizations. We also found in that survey that people with disabilities would be much more likely to visit arts and culture organizations more frequently if they knew their access needs could be met. So actually 72% of respondents said that they would be more likely to visit arts and culture organizations if they knew that they didn't have to worry about this kind of uncertainty, this fatigue, and potential harm as a result. And we also learned that organizations really want to be more accessible. They want to make change. They want to be a space where people with disabilities are welcome to engage fully as their authentic selves, both as patrons and as staff members. But that sometimes this idea of being accessible can just feel so big and so overwhelming that organizations, aren't really feeling sure where to begin, how to begin, or if they have the resources necessary, financial, human, otherwise, to make actionable changes. And so a lot of this information is really what drove us to say, okay, there's a need here. And how can our organization, at this sort of unique intersection of the work that we do and experience that we have, collaborate with our colleagues and experts in the field to really create something that can close some of these gaps and address some of these needs to move the work forward?
Great. So with some of that background on the why it was that we created this tool, what research led to us prioritizing this, we want to tell you a little bit more about what process we engaged in to create the tool. So as Portia said, this was a 2-year process of actual creation, but the visioning behind this was much longer than that. It was interesting hearing from Beth and Catherine earlier to talk about how, the requirement for organizations that are NEA grantees or pass-through grantees has always been there. And the necessity for organizations to self-assess has always been there. And our process of really thinking about creating this tool really came from wanting, as some of what Portia just referenced, wanting to come up with a tool that was as comprehensive, as user-friendly as possible. And so we had been in ideation and in community visioning and in research for much longer than these 2 years, and in actual building for 2 years. So it was a really extensive process. We really wanted to make sure that throughout this process, that everything we did and all the tools that were created and everything involved in this process was disability-centered. And so for that purpose, we gathered this team of advisors that we show you some images earlier that have both professional expertise in disability, in the law, in arts and culture, who work in arts and culture organizations of various types, but also who had lived experience with disability. Of 14, we showed you images of 12, but we had 14 advisors that worked with us. At least 10 of those 14 advisors have disabilities and different types of disabilities also, which was really important for us to really think about the considerations of the use and the content coming from a wide range of lived experience with disabilities. And again, they had also experience working in different types of organizations, in different roles within those organizations, both as administrators, as artists, some of what Catherine was alluding to earlier, as staff members, as leaders, as board members. So really trying to inform the creation of this tool with as wide a range of perspectives and expertise as possible. They advised from the very beginning, the advisory team advised from the very beginning, all the way from when we started to envision what the tool might look like, what the sections would be. They advise on the content, on almost like every word of the content, and you'll see there's a lot of content. They helped us to create supplemental tools to support the learning process of folks that are going to be using this tool. They helped us to vet the host platforms that we were going to use for this. And also we worked with user experts that helped really test tools and content throughout the process to make sure that it was accessible. So we had testers who were testing screen reader friendliness of the different tools, helping us identify the best tools for screen reader friendliness. We also worked with ASL interpreters and deaf interpreters to provide ASL interpretation for videos that are part of a self-assessment, which we will show you later as well. So there was a lot of thought put into the design process. And once the tool was created and finalized, we also wanted to make sure we went through an extra step before making it publicly available, where we would pilot it with actual arts and culture organizations who were going to use it and test it and give us feedback on their experience in the process. So to do that, we convened a national pilot. We put out a call, and 127 organizations throughout the country responded to that call, which was just such a wonderful reminder of how much this is needed and how much this is wanted by organizations. It was really humbling. From those 127, we selected 13 organizations to be part of the pilot. We worked with theaters, a zoo, a historic site, a music ensemble, many different types of organizations. Some of them were as large as the Kennedy Center was one of our piloters. And we also worked with really small organizations, like, for example, a rural theater in Maine, very small theater that, again, very different size, right? And so we wanted to make sure that different sizes of staff, of budget, of even the space were considered. We selected pilot organizations from different parts of the country because we thought that was another important consideration, the regional implications of what this might look like. And also organizations that were at very different stages of their work around accessibility. So some of the piloters were very well established, had been doing this work for many, many years, and some of them were very new to it. So we wanted to make sure that the tool was accessible and usable by organizations that are at different stages, that it was not too overwhelming, not too simple, and that we were finding kind of that space in between. We also wanted to make sure we included in the pilot organizations that had specific considerations. For example, we worked with a cultural division of an Indian nation, which has specific considerations in terms of how the law applies to them. Also organizations that have multiple facilities, to think about how does an organization that has 38 historic homes go through the process of assessing their accessibility, for example. And after doing this pilot and receiving feedback and making changes based on that feedback, we publicly launched the tool on July 31st at the LEAD conference in Seattle. I'm guessing that some of you in the room were part of the LEAD conference as well. I'm going to pass it back to Portia.
Great. So we're just going to give you some highlights about what the self-assessment is. So first of all, it is for arts and culture organizations. It's in the name, but this was always very intentional in our design as well, because we knew that, while there were some other self-assessment tools out there, we wanted something really specific to our context and the context of our colleagues. And as Nicole kind of mentioned in talking about the pilots, this means arts and culture organizations of all sizes, of all budgets, all types, all geographic locations, settings, and at all stages of their accessibility work. You sort of heard from our bios, but we are first and foremost educators. And so we really wanted this tool to also be a learning opportunity, and to ensure that any organization, no matter where they were kind of on their access journey, would be able to benefit from using the tool. We also wanted to make sure that this tool is disability centered. So that meant in every aspect of the process, as Nicole sort of mentioned, every question, every idea, even the impetus, the very needs that we were seeing in our community to create this came from people with disabilities. We also really wanted to prioritize incorporating disability history and culture into the self-assessment and into the questions, and to ensure that while the self-assessment does absolutely cover all areas of legal compliance necessary for us as arts and culture organizations, that it also balanced humanity and focused on best practice, and that some of these, important terms and concepts related to disability culture and disability justice were included, and were also questions that organizations were having to check in on, learn about, and understand as part of the process. The self-assessment is also very comprehensive. It is 300 questions that cover 5 core sections of accessibility, which are organizational approach. This includes a lot of the policies, practices, employment of people with disabilities, space, access services, communication, and programming. And now, while that can seem like a huge assessment, it is fully digital, it is self-paced, and it is designed to be, an interactive, progressive, and honestly enjoyable process. It's meant to be a tool, and we found from our pilots that organizations can engage with in an enjoyable way, learn from in an enjoyable way, and help move their work forward. It's meant to be approachable, it's meant to be usable, it is not meant to be evaluative. And so despite the kind of comprehensiveness that's needed to really get an understanding fully of accessibility, it shouldn't feel overwhelming. And something really interesting about this tool, and I think that makes it really unique, is that at the end of the self-assessment, every organization that completes it is provided with their own customized report that highlights the responses, the strengths, the areas of need for growth. So it really provides you with this, very usable tool and product to help understand and move the work forward. We built in a lot of resources along the way. If you don't know what you don't know, it's kind of hard to self-assess. And again, the educators in us wanted to ensure that everything was scaffolded necessary to make sure that all levels of learning and understanding could engage with this tool, understand what they were being asked, answer in accurate ways, and move forward in the process. So we created an accessibility glossary. We'll show you this in a moment, with 90 terms related to accessibility. Again, if you're reading a question and it's asking you about something and you don't know what that something is, you can't effectively answer it. And we also found through our research that having common language as a field is a really important first step in kind of moving our sector forward. We also created a 504 and ADA requirement ID tool. Again, when we were working with organizations, it didn't matter their size or location. We kept hearing a lot of confusion. What applies to me? What do I have to have? But what if we have more than 50 employees? What if we have less? What if we're funded this way? And so we created a really easy to use tool where you answer 12 questions, and based on those responses are provided with, again, a report that tells you exactly which components of the ADA and 504 apply to your specific organization. We also created accessibility plan templates so that once you have all this incredible learning and understanding, you have some really usable templates to put that learning into action and create a plan to increase and improve your accessibility. There are guides and resources all along the way. We also link to the ADA resource centers, which it was great to hear Beth and Catherine mention as well, and the ADA checklist for existing facilities. And then as an organization too, we offer webinars, one-to-one coaching, and are always available to help with technical assistance or anything else along the way as well. Oh, and then finally, we should start with this. The tool is free. It was really important to us that there be absolutely no financial barriers or paywall. We created this for our colleagues. We created this for, a field and a community that we care deeply about. And so we just want to make sure that everyone can utilize it, benefit from it, and, would love nothing more than to see Lots of organizations using it and lots of work improving as a result. All right. So I'll give you a little preview, and then Nicole is going to screen share so that you can actually see the self-assessment. So we're going to show you the self-assessment itself. It's digital, and we'll show you the main sections. We'll show you an example of a report that you'll receive. We'll show you an example of an accessibility plan. We have it in two formats. We're going to show you the Excel template today. And then we're going to start by showing some of those supplemental tools. And along the way, I will drop them in the chat because the other thing is too, while you can access all the tools through, being inside the self-assessment, we also have the links separately. So if they're ever a benefit to your organization when you're, not in or not participating in the self-assessment, you can access those. So I will drop them in, and Nicole will start by showing you a couple of those supplemental tools.
Great. So this is Nicole. So getting into the supplemental tools to give you just a quick overview of what you will see. We're going to start with the accessibility glossary. Again, it has 90 terms related to accessibility, some brief definitions, links for resources, templates, and examples. And then also we will show you the glossary itself as a document, but also how it is linked within the self-assessment. So how to access the glossary through the self-assessment. Oops, sorry. And then I will show you the ADA 504 self-identification tool. Again, it has 12 yes or no questions, and it'll create a report that is, again, unique based on those responses that outlines the laws, regulations, and legal responsibilities that apply specifically to your organization. And it also gives you some resources to engage in that work. And we really recommend that the identification tool is used as a companion to your process with the self-assessment, and ideally that you use it before you take the self-assessment to give you, again, that foundation of better understanding what your responsibilities are from a legal perspective. So I'm going to get out of the presentation, and first I will show you the glossary. Portia is going to be throwing again these links in the chat, which I believe she already has. This is what the glossary looks like. It's a Google Doc format. You will see there are, again, the terms that are included in the glossary are highlighted in bold, and then there is a short definition, very at a glance definition, 1 to 2 sentences of each of the terms, as well as 1 to 2 links to additional resources. If you open the outline on the left side, you will see a table of contents, so you can jump more easily between terms, which are alphabetized. I'm going now into this is the ADA/504 identification tool. This is a tool to help you better understand what legal requirements apply to your organization. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you 12 very straightforward yes or no questions. As an example, this is one that applies to probably all of you or most of you in the room. Is your organization a non-government organization that is open to the public? You might say yes here. There are questions around whether you own or lease the space where you operate, what kind of funding you receive, when your space was built or last altered, etc. And when you're done, you hit finish at the bottom, and that will create an automatic report for you, which will take all of the questions that you answered yes to and tell you what that means in terms of requirements. So for example, that question, if you said yes to the question about being open to the public and being a place of public accommodation, it will tell you that means you're a Title III organization, and this is what it means to be a Title III in terms of your legal requirements. So it'll outline that for you and give you some resources to further your learning. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the self-assessment, and Portia will put in the chat again the link to the self-assessment, which is which if you scroll down a little bit, you will see 3 boxes. On the left is in blue, the link to the self-assessment. And then you will also see opportunities to sign up for either free Zoom Q&A sessions, such as what we're doing today, to get more information and get your questions answered. So if you're in the process of taking the self-assessment and you bump into some questions, you can always hop into those. Those are once a month. You could also sign up for one-on-one support sessions directly with Open Door Arts. So you will go here and click on the self-assessment, and that takes you into the self-assessment platform. So now I am sharing again where you land when you go into the self-assessment. The first thing to point out here is there is at the top a self-assessment guide, a link to a guide that we put together. I want to really emphasize the importance of reading through that self-assessment guide, because it will give you some really important information and also a lot of considerations to think about before you start taking the self-assessment, including who might be involved within your organization, how to organize it, when to take it, etc. And it also has a lot of the links to those supplemental resources. So that's a really important place to start. Once you've done that, you can scroll down, and in the box below, you will enter an email address. Just make sure that you remember what email address you use. After entering your email address, you're going to receive an email that will give you a unique link to your self-assessment. And with that unique link, you can come and go from the self-assessment as much as you want. So if you close out and want to come back in a month and fill out a separate section, you can do that. You can do it all in one sitting, but you will have that link to come into it. I also want to emphasize that this email address does not need to be associated with your organization's name. The self-assessment is anonymous. We built it very intentionally to make sure that it stayed anonymous. So we never look at your data, and there is actually no place in the self-assessment where we ask you to enter the name of your organization. So if you wanted to use a personal email address, you can. It's the email address that you will have to use to continue to access it. So then you hit next, and that takes you right into the assessment. At the very beginning, there is a welcome section, and I wanted to point out a few features. There is a progress bar here at the top that is going to just show you how far along you are. There is a save progress button on the top right-hand corner. The tool will save your progress automatically, but it's always a good idea to hit save progress before you close out if you want to come out of the tool. I also want to name that we have PDF versions of each of the sections of the self-assessment at the top, so that if that's a format that works better for you, you can use that as well. And there will be a written introduction in English. And then at the bottom, you will see a video that has that same introduction in spoken English with captions and with ASL. So then we get right into the self-assessment, and now we're in the question section of the self-assessment. So as Portia said earlier, there are 5 sections to the self-assessment: organizational approach, space, access services, communication, and programming. And I will show you very quickly at a glance what that looks like. They are also color-coded, and you will see that in here, and you will see that also in the report in a minute. So at the beginning of each of these 5 sections, you will have, again, a PDF that you can download if you wish, with the introduction and also all of the questions for that section. There will be an overview with a little bit more information about what this section is about and some resources for the section. And then there's, again, that video with an alternative version of that written preface. And then we get into the questions. This is where the magic happens. Each of these 5 sections is organized into multiple subsections, and each of those subsections have a number of questions. So for example, under organizational approach, one of the subsections is values, beliefs, and mindset. We also have staff training, employment, etc. And so for each of the questions, you will have 6 answer choices. And these 6 answer choices are consistent throughout the entire self-assessment. The choices are fully true, mostly true, somewhat true, not sure, and not applicable. We just want you to be mindful of when to answer not sure or not applicable. We know that there are some questions that are really not applicable. For example, if we are asking a question about your elevator and the accessibility of your elevator and your organization does not have an elevator, then it truly is not applicable to you. We want to be mindful that when you're answering not applicable, you're pushing yourself to think about whether it truly is not applicable, or maybe it's something that you just haven't considered yet that could be applicable. So just keep that in mind. Another feature to point out is how I mentioned earlier that the glossary was linked within the self-assessment. So here's an example of what that looks like. So in question 2, the word intersectionality is a hyperlink, and it's also highlighted in blue. And you can see that when I put my cursor on it, a pop-up window shows up, which has the definition of that term that is in the glossary. So there are 3 ways to access the glossary: going directly to the document like we showed you earlier, hovering over the term and reading the definition on the pop-up, or you could also click on it and then it takes you to the document. And when it takes you to the document, it takes you to that word in the document, that term in the document. So again, multiple ways, so that as you are reading a question, if you bump into a term that might be a term that you're not familiar with, you can learn more about that term to help you be able to answer the question. And then another feature to highlight is, I'm going to give you question 8 as an example. Sorry, there we go. So on question 8, at the end of the question, you will see there's a little asterisk or a little star. That means that there is a legal requirement associated with this question. So hopefully by now you will have taken the 504 ADA identification tool, so you'll have a better understanding of what disability laws apply to your organization and what your requirements are from a legal perspective. So these asterisks are going to tell you, by the way, there is a legal requirement associated with this question, and we're giving resources at the top of each of the sections to help you better understand what those are. But that's what the asterisks mean. I'm going to scroll very quickly to the bottom of these sections. So you see one more feature that I wanted to point out. Okay, so now I'm at the bottom of the organizational approach section, and you will see that there is a little text box where you could take notes as you go along. So as you're completing the organizational approach section, if important considerations come up, or you want to remember something to share with your team or detail about something, you can jot it down here. And then all of that will be saved along with your responses so that you can refer to them when you're done with your self-assessment. I'm going to click next to go to the next section, which is space. There we go. Okay, so the space section, this refers to physical space, built environment, and navigation of that space. Again, same features as the previous section. And I want to point a couple of other things. So space is a very kind of, maybe a little bit more comprehensive than the other sections for a number of reasons. One is because there are so many legal standards, design standards that are associated with the built environment. And also because there are many different types of arts and culture organizations and many different types of spaces and features of those spaces. So the space section is a bit more comprehensive. And to help you and support you in that process and to help you better understand those legal requirements, we are included here in the resources section a link to a wonderful tool created by the New England ADA Center and the Institute for Human-Centered Design, which is the ADA checklist for existing facilities. This is a tool that basically helps organizations understand the 2010 ADA standards and how they might assess whether their facilities are meeting those standards or not. So I'm going to show you how we use it as a companion document in this section. So forgive me as I scroll. Okay, this is the first question in which this happens. So question 11 is about exterior routes to your entrances and whether they meet ADA requirements for dimensions, slope, curb ramps, and surface. So you will see the little asterisk. Yes, there's definitely a legal requirement around this. And you might be asking yourself when you're answering this question, I don't know what the ADA requirements for dimension, slope, curb ramps, and surface are. Well, we've got your back. We are writing here in parentheses the connection to where those are discussed in the ADA checklist for existing facilities. And I will show you what that looks like. So now I'm in the ADA checklist, and you will see there is a section around exterior accessible route, And 1.13, again, these are the sections that will answer those questions for you so that you can actually go ahead and assess. So again, the asterisk means there's a legal requirement. And if you see the parentheses, that means there's a direct connection to that section of the ADA checklist. So now I'm going to go straight to the next section, the third section, which is access services. I won't show you the whole section, but just want to note this has to do with the services that we provide for folks with disabilities to be able to access our space, our services, our communication. So these are things like ASL interpretation, closed captioning, audio description, etc. The fourth section is communication. Again, you probably have noticed by now the color coding. Communication is all about the ways in which your organization communicates about disability, and also the ways in which your organization communicates the services and features and all of the accessibility accommodations that you have in place and features to the community in accessible ways so that they can have access to that information. And the last section is programming. Programming is actually the shortest section because so many of the elements that would apply to your programs have already been captured in the other 4 sections. So for example, the physical spaces in which programming takes place have already been addressed in the space section. So it's a little bit shorter. Okay, so now you're done assessing in those 5 areas. You've answered all the questions. So we get to the closing section of the self-assessment. And here is where we get really excited about the opportunities that this self-assessment tool and its use by organizations all over the country gives us so many wonderful opportunities for research at a scale that we've never seen before, and at a level of detail that we've never seen before. So what we're trying to capture here is demographic information that, again, is anonymous. We are not using your organization's name to better understand who has taken the self-assessment. So we'll ask you for your primary organization type, secondary, if that applies, the size of your staff, the size of your budget, where your organization is located, in what state. And then we ask you here to give us permission to use your responses in an aggregate data set. Again, this is still anonymous. We're using aggregate data for large field-wide research purposes. At the bottom here, if you ever work with a state or local arts agency or a foundation that asks you to provide a code, this is where you would enter it. And the purpose of the code would be, for example, let's say the Oklahoma Arts Council gave you a code. This would be so that Open Door Arts can take all of that aggregate data only for Oklahoma Arts Council grantees to report back to the Oklahoma Arts Council that bigger picture data so that they can better provide you with supports and resources. Again, they would not see a independent organization's data because we don't have access to your names anyway. When you are done with that, you are done. And this is where you go through the magical process of hitting the finish button. But please make sure you are done, that you have answered all the questions that you are able to answer that are applicable before you hit finish. And the reason is because once you hit finish, you cannot go back, and it triggers automatically the creation of that report that Portia was talking about that I will show you next. So make sure you're really, really, truly done before you hit finish. So when you have hit finish, you will get in a couple of minutes, both it'll pop up on the screen and it will also be sent to your email. You will get a report. And the report is essentially a synthesis of all the data you provided. So a direct reflection of your own responses in the form of scores so that you can kind of at a glance see where are we doing great and take a moment to give yourself a pat in the back and celebrate all the things that you're doing well. And also all of the areas where we might need to pay more attention and grow. So you're going to get an overall score for the entire assessment. And then you're going to get section scores for each of those 5 sections. And this is where the color coding really helps. So you're going to get, again, one score for each of those 5 sections. So you can start seeing at a glance, where are we doing better? Where do we need to pay more attention? And then we're going to break it down even further for you by taking each of the 5 sections and then breaking it up into those subsections within each of those 5 sections. So again, Here, for example, in this report, we can see that accountability scored lower than some of the other categories. So this is an area where you might want to pay close attention. If you don't have a score that shows up, that means that you skipped that section because it didn't apply to your organization. So you will not see a score. I'm going to scroll. This happens for all 5 sections. You will see they're all color-coded. And then we get to the part of the self-assessment that is in many ways the most important. So you've assessed, you've learned, you have maybe learned things you didn't know, you've asked yourself questions that you may or may not have asked yourself. Now, what do you do with that information? So this is where you really go through the most important process, which is to create an accessibility plan, to take all of that data and put it into an actionable plan for improvement. We're going to give you some considerations, some suggested steps to think about as you're creating your access plan for you to prioritize. And we're going to give you some resources and support, including 2 templates that we created that are, again, in Excel or Google Sheet format, and another one in Word or Google Doc format. The content is very much the same, but the format is a little bit different. And I'm going to show you an example, which is, oh, sorry, before I do that, very quickly, let me show you one other thing that is in your report that is really important. Sorry, I'm going back into the report. When you keep scrolling, you will see all of your responses at the end of the report. So every single response that you gave will be there. If you typed anything in that box at the bottom, I'm going to show you. It will show up. Sorry, I think I just passed it. But if you typed anything in that box at the bottom, it will show up here in the report. So now I will show you the example of the accessibility template, which is in Excel or Google Sheets format that we created. It's going to walk you through a number of categories, and I'm going to give you an example. So first, it says what category of the self-assessment is it in? So you can go through the bar and choose space, access services, communication, whichever section it was. What is the item? In this case, it was hiring materials. What is the issue with that item? We said hiring materials are missing accessibility information. What is our plan for improvement? So we say, this is what we need to do to that, those hiring materials. What is your plan completion date? You would add a date. You can say who is responsible or what department is responsible. If there's an approximate cost, you can add it here. Very often there isn't a cost. If you need to fundraise for it, or if you need to identify which funding source, you can add it here. And whether it's low, medium, or high priority level, so that you can also prioritize that way. If it's in progress, not started, or completed, and you can add some notes. And you can also use sort and filter features here so that you can sort by priority level, you can sort by category, you can sort by person responsible, whatever is helpful to you. And now I am going to actually stop sharing screen so that we can get back to you all and answer your questions.
This is Erica. I'm just chiming in to encourage anyone who has a question to unmute yourself and chime in. Looks like someone, Blakely Black, is raising their hand. Come on in, Blakely, with your question.
Sorry, it's been 4.5 years and I still get confused as where the mute and unmute button is sometimes. Anyway, hi, I'm Blakely. I don't think I can turn on videos, so I'll describe myself, but you can't see me anyway. But anyway, I am a pretty pale white lady with dark hair, and I am 44 to be specific, and which I think is the age of Open Door Arts from what I'm piecing together, 1980. Woo woo. Anyway, so I love that. I just have to say, this isn't a question at first, but I just have to say, I can't tell you. I mean, I get on all these calls because I'm so thrilled by the incredible resources that are available through SVA and through any ADA work and the NEA. It's just amazing. But I feel like today I had no idea that I was going to get onto a call where like basically you're giving me what I thought I had to make myself. This is phenomenal, and your attention to detail and your concern for every sort of participant in this, whether it's the people who are actually filling out the information or the, those same people are filling it out for their, their audiences, their artists, their everybody. It's just amazing. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I'm going to thank you in writing, but just want to do that here. And also just wanted to find out, I am working as an independent, I guess the easiest word to say is consultant, but I hate that word because it's so general. But my focus is I have, you can't see it or not on the screen, but I have a mobility disability where for the past 20 years, I've had just a very unusual gait. I know everything I don't have, but for me, it's been something that's really helpful, oddly, in that it makes me see, one, from a mobility perspective, I can quickly see anything that isn't working. If it's not working for me, it's really not working for somebody who's, dealing with a more, because I am mobile, I can walk, but I know, I can see where things need to change, but also reminds me daily or almost with every step that like, I don't know what other people are dealing with all the other different types of disability. And I think that's so important right now. But I was just wondering, and I can talk about this offline, but like my big thing that I'm always thinking about sort of on my own, I have I'm building out connections. I've been doing this work for about 3 years now independently and certified ADA coordinator, mainly just so that I could wrap my brain around all of that information, which I love what you're doing is making it clear because it's so tough for people, arts organizations to have time to even process that. But I'm just wondering like what you think are good ways for someone like me to support arts organizations. Of course, telling them about this is huge, but also, what I want to do is also be, maybe it's sort of like once they've got their report and they know that they're 75% of the way on something or whatever, like how best to, I kind of see myself as like a general contractor working with different groups that maybe, I mean, of course, thankfully now most places are physically accessible, but as you said, you can't guarantee that, but like really working on, whether it's, I mean, it depends on if it's a theater performance or an arts or art show or whatever, but just trying to help them get each little element, because I feel like it's such a big, overwhelming, as you've already said and emphasized, task that people just truly don't know. So I think mainly I'm just thanking you for providing this. But if you had any thoughts from your perspective on, building this out for a little person like me, little me, but of how to approach, how to take this and really, help people put it to use and grow.
Yeah. Well,
I'll
thank
be
you so
quiet.
much. Yeah.
I'll
Thank
be
you so
myself.
much for your, well, first of all, thank you so much for the appreciation. And as you said, like, Blakely, that we created this tool also because we're an arts organization that has been dreaming about this existing and we didn't see it. And so we wanted it. And so we made it, and we made it with a lot of other people, but it's true. Like it's such a necessary process and such a necessary part of the process of improving your accessibilities to start with knowing what you don't know and starting with being able to answer very concrete questions about where you are now so that you can envision what where you want to be could possibly even look like. So yes, agreed. And then to your question about how to support organizations, I think as we said, the tool is free. You can share it with any organization you support. Anyone in the room can share it with any organization. If you have friends at other organizations, please let them know. The tool is free. Anybody can use it. I think the process of self-assessing is the most critical first step. And then I would say another super important element, and you can see how that was evident in our own process of creating the tool, is to work with the disability community. It's to work with user experts, to work with advisors, to work with folks that are employed in your organization. Your advisory board, your board should, include many, many members with disabilities, right? And so starting with having a better understanding. For us to create this, for the work we were doing in Massachusetts, we needed to know where Massachusetts was first. So we did research, we talked to experts, we talked to user experts. And that was such a critical foundation to the work. If we hadn't asked people what they need, what they want, and how their experience looks like now, it would have been really hard to know where to get better. So I think talk to your local disability community, communities, because there are many disability communities, but just make sure they're involved in every step of the process. And then again, like related to self-assessment, it's lovely to self-assess, but if you don't create an accessibility plan and don't work on actualizing that accessibility plan, yeah, you'll learn a lot, but not a lot of concrete change will happen. So just really going through that critical process of doing that and really holding yourself accountable to that improvement, as long as it might take. It could be that some items take no time and some items take 5 years, but holding yourself accountable to those improvements is really, really critically important.
Thank you so much for that answer. And it will not take more than 20 seconds to reply. I think what you said helps me, and it also makes me realize I need to add a little bit to my question. I work independently with arts organizations, which, it depends on obviously budget and everything, but a lot of the arts organizations I've found, while they do have somebody who's designated as an ADA coordinator, they really don't have the bandwidth to do much beyond the, guaranteed they're not going to get, in trouble stage. And so I've worked with a really large and even older than I am performing arts festival, and found that they, welcomed the help, but were clueless. And I'm wondering if you feel, this may be a weird question, but like, when you design this, like, do you feel comfortable with people like me, where I'm not actually in the organization, but they're hiring me to do assessments using this tool and helping them use the tool, making it very transparent that that's what I'm using?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And anyone else in the room who is a consultant, feel free to use this tool to help the people that you're supporting. I mean, they would have access to it for free anyway. So you can use it to support their process, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. I'd like to make sure
yeah.
that I'm, doing everything right, and not somehow.
We appreciate your question.
Okay, thanks. And I'm
and
done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Blakely. And I just wanted to read some questions in the chat. There was a question about the average time that it takes for people to complete the self-assessment, and Portia can address that.
Sure. So based on our pilot and then the organizations that have taken it so far, the average time for completion is about 2.6 hours. I can give you a little bit more detail on the range, which was 1 hour to 7 hours for our 13, and there was a 14th pilot organization. And if it's helpful and you can start to sort of envision, your own organization and what your process would be like, we saw some pretty clear patterns. So the organizations where this took about an hour and was a pretty quick process were typically smaller, where, maybe there was only a staff of 2, in one case, a staff of 1. So that meant that there was one individual that had a very clear and intimate knowledge of all aspects of the assessment. And so that individual is really easily able to answer the questions independently, quickly, without gathering much information. So then in kind of that mid-range, we had, for the most part, mid-sized teams, where the route was to choose sort of like a representative who could really speak to the specificity of questions for each of those 5 program areas. Each individual representative kind of took the questions, some electronically, some printed off, answered them. They came back together, a little bit of discussion, and then completed the assessment and got the report. So that was kind of that mid-range. And then the longest range, the organization that took about 7 hours, had some pretty unique characteristics and a unique approach to this, but perhaps it would be, similar to the one that you would take. So their process was to bring kind of those those 5 representatives all together. And as a team, they collectively went through all the questions one by one. And in doing so, had a lot of discussion to kind of come to the response and to do a little bit of like learning along the way. They were an organization that was pretty new in their accessibility work. And so as they were answering the questions, there was a lot of group learning and group discussion that happened. And so that's where we got that kind of higher end of the process taking a bit longer and, requiring a bit more staff time because they wanted to engage with the tool in that way. So hopefully that's helpful and you can start to maybe think about where your organization would fall in the process that you would take. And we give some more recommendations too in that beginning guide. So you can start to conceptualize sort of your people, your plan, and your process for taking this if you choose to.
And I'll just add, and I know this is rare, but that fictional organization that I shared earlier that has 38 historic properties, it will probably take them a lot longer to complete the self-assessment, but they will probably do it site by site, or they could do some elements. And so there are considerations like if you have a multi-facility organization, probably it will take longer to complete it. I see other questions in the chat. There was a question asked by Amanda, thank you, that Beth answered. It was about whether the self-assessment would count toward the NEA's requirement of a 504 self-evaluation for those receiving NEA or federal pass-through funds. And Beth responded, Amanda, grantees are able to use any assessment tool that covers the 504 requirements under our regulations. This tool is comprehensive enough to cover the requirements. Beth, was there anything you wanted to add, or
That's basically it. We aren't able to endorse any one product or anything. And just, there are a lot of tools, different types of tools out there. And this one seems to cover our requirements. And especially the parts that have the asterisk, those reflect the federal requirements. So just wanted to, we're here to share our workbook and to hear more about your tool.
Awesome. And then there was another question from Amanda. As long as people are using the same email address to access the report, can multiple people work on the assessment? Portia, can you? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that was the approach that a lot of our pilot organizations have taken. They had one organizational email and then each person could log in, kind of complete their section and collaboratively get that completed. And I did want to mention, I know Nicole sort of alluded to it earlier, but you can skip any sections that aren't applicable to you. And with a different email address, you can take the entire assessment or any section of the assessment as many times as you'd like, as long as there's a unique email. So back to that site that has 38 historic homes, that approach was to sort of say, okay, well, we have one organizational assessment that we know kind of covers like our main office, all of the policies and procedures that span across the 38 organizations or 38 sites, sorry. And then each of the 38 sites would do just the aspects that are unique to that site. And then they would be able to sort of bring them together and get a whole picture. We also have other organizations where it was sort of like, no, each site, we have, 5 sites and each one of them is totally unique. There's a different manager, there are different policies, there are different procedures. So, we may be a parent organization, but we need 5 separate full assessments. And so it just kind of varies on the organization, but the tool is designed to be really flexible in use. So you can take or leave whatever you need to make it work for your unique circumstances.
I see that Stephen has asked in the chat, you mentioned we can submit our data for your research. What is your hypothesis and did you have IRB approval? So we have not sought out IRB approval. We have applied for an NEA research grant, which is pending. And our goal is to do 3 years worth of data to better understand essentially the state of accessibility in the arts and culture sector throughout the United States. So because we have 300 questions, 5 full sections, 44 subsections of data from a broad range of organizations, what we're trying to do with that data is to be able to tell a better picture of where we are as a sector, what are our areas of strength, what are our biggest areas of growth, and so that with that data, we can start to be more active in terms of collective action for supporting organizations at a bigger scale to improve. We also then want to disaggregate some of that data by organization type, by budget size, by location, and start to see if there are unique unique data points that help us better understand, the unique circumstances of museums versus theaters versus historic homes versus live collection, whatever the way it is that we're disaggregating the data. Stephen, does that answer your question, or any follow-ups to that? And we're very, very much okay. I see. Yes, thank you in the chat. We are very much in the early stages of identifying what that process is going to look like. We know what the goals are, and we know what we want to do with it, and we also know the potential of this data. Again, like there isn't that level of detail at that scale right now. And again, we knew that in the process of having organizations take the assessment, there was just such a unique and such a wonderful data set that the sector can use to continue improving and to continue. Again, it's kind of the same idea of the self-assessment. It's like, we don't know what we don't know. If we want to grow as an organization, we want to know where we are. If we want to grow as a sector, we need to know where we are as a sector. And so this is what the opportunity provides us. Thank you for that question.
This is Erica at the Oklahoma Arts Council. Just noting the time, we're about 4 minutes until we have scheduled ourselves to conclude. Now would be a good time if you have any burning questions, drop it in the chat or come off on mute, unmute. We also have included in the chat our contacts. So we've got contact information from Open Door Arts, also our NEA team, and for Oklahoma arts organizations, I am here for you. This has been an amazing presentation and such a great resource. I am so grateful that you have created such a comprehensive tool. As Beth mentioned, at the beginning of our presentation, arts organizations receiving, this federal funding through the NEA and then, through the state arts agencies are required to have a self-assessment tool on file. This is an excellent tool, but there are other tools as well. So if you have any questions about that, my Oklahoma people, reach out to me, but I would, I'd encourage you, if you were able to use this tool to do it. It's an incredible, especially how it formulates at the very end this report. I mean, that alone is so invaluable. So just emphasizing my gratitude. And I think that, I'll give it a moment. Anyone? Any final thoughts, Beth or Catherine or Portia?
Just thank you for inviting us. We're here to help if you ever have any questions.
Thank you. Okay, well, then I guess with that, we can go ahead and say goodbye. Thanks everyone for joining us.